This story is a work of fiction inspired by horror folklore and urban legends. All characters, institutions, and events are entirely imaginary and do not depict any real individuals or religious organizations. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. This story contains themes of psychological horror, mystery, and supernatural fear, intended solely for entertainment purposes. The road to St. Mary's Hill was barely a road at all, a broken stretch of dirt and weeds that twisted upward through the fog-draped forest. Elena Crow's tires crunched over gravel, the sound echoing through the silence like a heartbeat in a tomb. The GPS had long since lost signal, and the last sign of civilization, a rusted bus stop, was miles behind her. Yet something deeper than curiosity drove her forward. Her documentary series, Forgotten Faiths, had covered shuttered monasteries, haunted cemeteries, and cult ruins before, but St. Mary's Convent was different. In 1978, 27 nuns and their Mother Superior had vanished without a trace. The church had classified the case as a tragedy of natural causes and structural collapse. Locals, however, whispered something else, that the convent had been cursed, swallowed by a darkness born of faith itself. As the car climbed the final bend, the convent appeared through the mist, a looming carcass of Gothic stone, its spires cracked, its windows black like hollow eyes. The cross that once crowned the chapel leaned crookedly, one arm broken. Crows perched along the belfry like sentinels of decay. Elena parked the car near a rusted gate half buried in vines. The metal bore a faint inscription, Sancta Maria, Custodi Nossa Malo. Holy Mary, protect us from evil. She whispered the words under her breath, unsure why, and stepped out. The air was unnaturally still. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. Only the faint hum of wind passing through the skeletal remains of stained glass. She switched on her handheld recorder. Habit, instinct. Day 1. St. Mary's Hill Convent. Closed in 1978 under mysterious circumstances. Locals claim to hear bells at night, though the tower collapsed over 40 years ago. Let's find out what's left of God in this place. She forced a chuckle, but it came out brittle. As she approached the gate, she noticed a small wooden cross hanging from the latch. It was new, freshly carved. Someone had been here recently. She filmed it, zooming in. A faint symbol was etched into the wood, a reversed crucifix with a tear-shaped mark below it. She frowned, tracing it with her finger. It was warm to the touch. A sudden clang shattered the silence. Metal against metal. The gate had swung open on its own. For a long moment, Elena stood frozen. Logic told her it was the wind. But the air was still heavy, thick with the scent of mildew and something faintly metallic, like dried blood. She lifted her camera again and stepped through. The courtyard was littered with broken rosaries, candle stubs, and shards of porcelain statues. A headless Virgin Mary leaned against the wall, her arms open as if in eternal surrender. Vines crawled through shattered windows. Every step echoed across the cloister. Elena paused when she reached the old fountain in the center. Its basin was filled not with water, but with murky rain and black leaves. Something glinted at the bottom. She crouched, dipping her fingers in. It was a silver pendant shaped like a heart, engraved with the name Sister Miriam. Lost and found, she muttered into the recorder, pocketing it. Maybe the archives will tell me who she was. Then came the sound. Faint, distant chime. Like a bell. She turned sharply toward the belfry. Nothing moved. The bell tower stood broken. The rope frayed. The metal rusted beyond use. But she heard it again. A second chime, slow, deliberate, followed by what sounded like footsteps pacing across the upper level. Her camera trembled slightly in her hands as she zoomed in on the tower. No one, just shadows. There's someone up there, she whispered into the mic or something. The air temperature dropped. Her breath came out visible. When she turned back toward her car, it was gone. For one terrible heartbeat, she thought she'd gone insane. She had parked it right by the gate. She knew she had. But now, all that remained were tire tracks half buried in mist. The gate itself was closed again. Panic prickled her throat. She turned in circles, calling out, Hello? Anyone here? Her voice echoed and died. Only silence answered. Then, faintly, behind her, a woman's voice. Welcome home, sister. Elena spun, flashlight shaking. The courtyard was empty. She stood perfectly still, heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her teeth. The mist thickened, curling like smoke around her legs. She switched her recorder back on with trembling fingers. I heard a voice. Female. Close. Words unclear. Possibly residual sound echoing from a whisper. Right in her ear this time. Don't confess here. She dropped the recorder. It hit the cobblestones with a click. The flashlight flickered. For half a second, she saw a silhouette standing near the chapel door. Tall, robed in black, face hidden under a wimple. A nun. But wrong. Too tall. Too still. Elena blinked, and the figure was gone. Only the door remained, slightly ajar. Adrenaline warred with reason. Fear clawed at the edges of her curiosity. But her journalist's instinct pushed her forward. Every step toward the chapel felt heavier, the air denser. She pushed the door open. The hinges groaned like a dying animal. The smell hit her first. Old incense, rot, and something like sulfur. Her light scanned the pews, all overturned, some with deep claw marks. The crucifix above the altar hung upside down. Elena whispered, "What happened to you people?" Something rustled near the altar. She raised her camera just as a rosary slid off the altar by itself, beads scattering across the floor in a perfect line that led toward the confessional booth. The same confessional she'd later discover housed the recorder, the one that would whisper about the devil wearing a nun's habit. But for now, she only heard the last sound before the door behind her slammed shut. The echo of bells, 12 slow tolls reverberating through stone. Elena's flashlight went out. The recording caught her whisper before it ended. If anyone finds this, St. Mary's isn't abandoned. It's waiting. Elena woke to the sharp scent of candle wax and dust. Her flashlight lay beside her, dead, and her recorder's red light blinked weakly. For a moment, she couldn't tell whether she had slept or fainted. The convent's chapel loomed in gray daylight filtering through fractured stained glass, painting the floor with blood-red light. She gathered her gear, whispering, "Okay, we're fine, we're fine." Her voice echoed, but not like before. The acoustics seemed wrong, delayed, layered, as if the building itself was repeating her words under its breath. She clicked her recorder. Day 2. The chapel doors closed on their own. Possible air pressure shift. But something doesn't feel right. I think I heard voices in the dark. As she spoke, her eyes drifted toward the confession booth along the wall. 2 wooden compartments separated by a thin lattice. The wood was darker there, soaked and swollen as if it had absorbed years of tears and whispered sins. Elena approached slowly. The small curtain covering the priest's side fluttered, though no wind touched it. Inside, the seat was cracked, the kneeling cushion torn. Yet something gleamed beneath the dust. A recorder old-fashioned, with a thin layer of grime. Its tape reel was half-wound, labeled in faded pen, "Confession, October 29th, 1978. Her pulse quickened. She pressed play. Static filled the silence. A hiss, then a faint, trembling female voice. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." Elena turned her volume up. "I have seen the devil. He walks among us wearing the habit of a nun. His face is not his own." There was a pause, and then the sound of weeping. "Mother says he will save us through fire. But his eyes, oh Lord, his eyes are full of teeth." A sharp click. The tape ended. Elena's hand shook as she rewound the tape, replayed it, then stopped. Devil wearing a nun's habit. Could it be a metaphor? Delusion. Mass hysteria before the disappearance. She switched off the recorder but noticed her own recorder, the modern one, had captured something extra. A faint whisper layered behind the tape playback. When she played it back, it repeated the same line, but the voice was her own. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." Her breath caught. She hadn't said those words aloud. Suddenly, A soft creak echoed from behind the confessional wall. She pressed her ear against it. Faint movement, like someone breathing slowly on the other side. She whispered, "Hello? Anyone there?" No answer. Then tap, tap, tap. Slow, deliberate knocks from inside the wall. She stepped back, pulse hammering. "Who's there?" The tapping turned into scratching, low and furious, as if fingernails raked the wood. A dry voice hissed from within. One word, "Confess." Elena stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a broken pew. Her flashlight flickered back to life for a split second, long enough for her to see a pale hand reaching through the lattice of the confessional window before vanishing into shadow. She ran toward the main doors, locked tight. The bolts were rusted, but she hadn't locked them. She yanked hard, but they didn't move. Okay, just breathe," she whispered, pacing. "There's got to be another way out." She moved deeper into the chapel, past the altar, and found a side corridor leading to the cloister hall. The hallway was lined with portraits of nuns, all blackened by mold. Their faces were blurred, except for one, Mother Lucilla, the Reverend Superior. Her painted eyes followed Elena as she walked, a faint smile on her lips. Below the portrait, an inscription read, "Obedience brings salvation." As she reached the end of the corridor, a gust of air whispered past her, smelling of burnt incense and rot. She turned, expecting a door, but there was none. The entrance she'd come through was gone. Only a solid wall stood behind her. She lifted her camera, panning the space. The screen flickered, showing faint outlines of the confessional again, even though she was no longer in the chapel. The camera's timestamp glitched, jumping back to 1978. No, this can't." The sound of a bell interrupted her. One chime, then two, then a chorus of distant whispers filling the corridor. Voices murmuring prayers in Latin. Her camera picked them up clearly, even as her ears heard only the faint echo. "Corpus mea, donum inferni." She didn't understand the words, but their rhythm made her skin crawl. She followed the sound, almost against her will, until she reached another door. Its wooden surface was scarred with claw-like scratches forming a crude cross. She pushed it open and found herself in a small, candlelit room. The candles were still burning. On the floor lay open confession notebooks, dozens of them, written in frantic Latin script. The walls were covered with parchment slips pinned in crosses, each stained with something dark. She picked one up. It was a prayer, but rewritten, twisted. "Deliver us not from evil, for evil is thy servant." Elena felt the weight of the convent pressing in, as though the building itself were exhaling. She turned, half expecting to see the black nun standing behind her. Instead, the candles flickered violently, and from the far corner came a whisper. Close, wet, human. "It's your turn." The air temperature plummeted. Frost crept along the walls, freezing the ink mid-drip. Elena stumbled back, bumping into the confessional booth that hadn't been there moments ago. From inside came a rhythmic thump, something moving, slow and deliberate. Her camera lens began fogging. She aimed it toward the lattice window. Two glowing eyes stared back. The voice, calm and hollow, whispered, "Say it. I absolve you." Elena screamed, shoving the camera forward to break the wood. But when she did, the confessional was empty. Only her own voice echoed, faintly distorted. "I absolve you." Her equipment hissed with feedback, lights flickering wildly. She backed away, heart racing. In the distance, the chapel doors finally creaked open on their own. Outside, the fog had thickened into a wall. She could barely see a meter ahead. But she ran through it anyway, desperate for air, desperate for light. As she passed the courtyard fountain again, she caught sight of something in the water. The same recorder, floating, tape still spinning. It wasn't possible. She had left it inside. She reached for it. The tape rolled itself backward, as if unseen hands rewound it. Then her own voice came from it, whispering a confession she had never made. "Forgive me, Father. I have come to take their place." The water rippled violently. A shadow passed beneath the surface, the silhouette of a nun, her hands reaching upward. Elena stumbled back, tripping over the fountain's edge. She hit the ground hard, gasping. The mist swirled above her like a living thing, forming faint outlines. Dozens of nuns, faces blurred, habits soaked, mouths moving in silent prayer. She blinked once and they vanished. Elena sat up, soaked in cold sweat, her heart pounding. She looked back at the convent. The chapel door was closed again. She lifted her recorder, voice shaking. End of entry. Something or someone is replaying my words. I'm not alone here. I think. The confessional remembers. A pause. Then, faintly from her recorder, her own voice repeated the last line. The confessional remembers. And behind it, a second whisper. Not hers. So will you. The morning light over St. Mary's Hill had a strange color. Pale, almost silver, the kind of light that felt drained of warmth. Elena sat near her tent, her recorder on the ground, playing back the night's audio. She'd slept only in fragments, haunted by the echoing phrase she'd heard over and over in her dreams. The confessional remembers. The tape hissed, and then came a faint knock, 3 times steady. Then her own breathing, uneven and quick. But what froze her blood wasn't the sound of footsteps or whispers this time. It was the faint voice, a woman's voice, measured and sad. Find the diary, beneath the eyes of the saints. She replayed it 3 times. It was real. By mid-morning, the mist began to thin, revealing the convent's crumbling architecture. The walls leaned inward, as if the building were slowly collapsing into itself. Statues of saints lined the outer corridor, each one decayed beyond recognition. Their faces worn smooth by time, their eyes hollow sockets. Beneath the eyes of the saints, the phrase echoed in her head as she walked. Her camera rolled continuously, every footstep crunching over broken tiles. She reached a half-collapsed hallway, rows of marble saints leaning against the wall like mourners frozen mid-prayer. There, under one statue's gaze, Saint Agatha, ironically. She noticed something odd. A discolored patch of stone, rectangular, as though something had been sealed behind it. She pressed her hand against it. The stone shifted slightly, and cold air hissed out through a crack. She pulled harder, the block loosening until it fell away with a dull thud. Behind it, wrapped in brittle fabric, was a leather-bound book coated in dust and dried wax. Elena's breath caught. She brushed away the grime. Embossed on the cover were the initials SA and the year 1977. She spoke into her recorder, voice trembling with excitement. Found a diary, Sister Agatha, possibly one of the missing nuns, stored behind the statue's base. Date predates the disappearance by roughly a year. She opened it carefully. The first page was a prayer. Blessed be the Mother of Mercy, who guards us from the deceiver. But if mercy fails, may faith shield us from what faith has called forth. The handwriting was elegant but grew increasingly erratic with each page. The next entry chilled her. Mother Lucilla has changed the prayers. She says God no longer listens through words, but through the pulse of our hearts. At midnight, she gathers us beneath the chapel to pray in silence. I saw her cut her palm and mark the floor with blood. She said it was an offering, a promise to the one who watches from below. Elena swallowed hard. She turned to the next page, where ink had bled from heavy pressure. The others obey. They say they feel God's warmth when she speaks in that old tongue. But I feel only cold. And sometimes, when she prays, I smell smoke, even though no candle burns. The entries became shorter, fragmented, desperate. Sister Miriam vanished yesterday. Mother said she was taken to the upper chambers for purification. But her bed was still warm this morning. The chapel bell rings by itself now. It sounds like laughter. I found something in the crypt, bones. Too many bones. Lucilla says salvation lies below the chapel. But below lies no God. Elena stopped there. Her hands trembled. The words were almost identical to the final line quoted in local folklore. She whispered, "So it's true. It wasn't collapse. It was ritual." She flipped to the back pages. Newer ink, shaky, uneven. The last entries were written in a different tone, almost feverish. He is here now. He moves between the sisters, wearing faces of light. When I look upon him, my skin burns. Mother says it is purification. I heard them last night in the chapel. The chants are not prayers. They sound like reversed hymns, and the candles burn black. She told me to write my confessions down so the convent will remember. I think that's why no one leaves. We are all being written into his book. Elena turned the final page. A single line scrawled in dried blood. If you read this, run. The ink remembers. For a moment the world around her seemed to tilt. The air thickened. She blinked hard, but her vision swam with dark shapes. Fleeting, shifting figures moving along the hallway. She tore her eyes from the page, closing the book. The whispering began again. Faint, layered, like dozens of voices murmuring prayers just behind the walls. Deliver us not, deliver us not. The saints' statues appeared to lean closer, their eyeless faces warped in shadow. She took a shaky step backward, clutching the diary to her chest. Something dripped from above, dark, sticky drops landing on the book's cover. She looked up. The ceiling was cracked open, revealing what looked like the underside of a wooden floor, and from between the boards seeped a slow ooze of dark liquid. Blood. She backed away, nearly slipping. The whispering turned to wails, low and distant, echoing through the convent. Elena fled down the corridor, her camera bouncing against her chest. She turned a corner and burst through a half-collapsed door into what seemed to be an old library. Rows of decaying books lined the walls, their spines eaten by mold. She slammed the door shut behind her and leaned against it, gasping for breath. The air inside was thick with dust. The windows were sealed with planks, blocking out the light. On the table in the center lay an open Bible, pages yellow and crumbling. Every line of text had been crossed out except one, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. Elena slowly placed the diary beside it, flipping back to the middle pages. Her camera caught a flicker, movement on the page itself. The ink was shifting, faintly pulsing as though alive. Then, as she stared, new words began to appear, bleeding through from beneath the surface of the paper. You found me, sister. Her heart pounded. She slammed the diary shut. The sound echoed unnaturally loud, and in the silence that followed, she heard a soft voice near her ear, breathy and close. Agatha has been waiting. She turned sharply, no one there, only dust drifting through the faint light. But on the far wall, in the dust, someone or something had traced words with a finger. Go below. Elena raised her flashlight. A section of the floorboards was missing beneath the table, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling into the dark. Her recorder crackled to life on its own. The last sound it captured before cutting to static was her voice whispering, though she hadn't spoken a word, below lies no God, and then silence. The long, echoing corridor leading to the confession chamber was colder than any other part of the convent. Thick, ancient stones lined the walls, and every sound, even the soft rustle of Sister Margaret's robes, bounced back like a haunting echo. The smell of burning wax and old incense filled the air. For decades, no one had dared to enter this room after sundown. They called it the Room of Whispers. Dr. Evelyn Crane and Father Gabriel stood outside its heavy wooden doors. Both were pale and tense. This is where the nuns came for confession, Gabriel said quietly. But over time, they began confessing things that didn't belong to them, as if the room itself was listening and taking pieces of their souls. Evelyn adjusted the flashlight in her trembling hand. And after that? She asked. They changed, he said. They began chanting in their sleep. Some claimed they heard a voice replying from behind the confessional. A voice that wasn't human. The hinges creaked like bones breaking as Evelyn pushed the door open. The chamber was dim, lit by dying candles that flickered despite no wind. The confessional booth stood in the center, carved with religious symbols that had faded into grotesque faces over time. Evelyn approached slowly, her recorder in hand. We're here to uncover the truth, she said under her breath, though she wasn't sure to whom she was speaking, to Gabriel or to something unseen. The recorder began to pick up faint sounds. Whispers, low and indecipherable, threading through the silence like smoke. The voices grew clearer, layered over one another. Women praying, crying, begging. Evelyn's hand shook. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Father Gabriel didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the confessional booth. "Look," he said, pointing to a faint trail of blood along the wooden floorboards. It led directly to the priest's seat behind the screen, the same place where countless nuns had once confessed. The door to that compartment was slightly ajar. Evelyn reached for it. "Don't," Gabriel warned, but she didn't stop. The moment her fingers touched the door, the recorder screeched with static. The candles flared violently, and a gust of freezing air swept through the chamber. Evelyn stumbled back as the door slowly opened on its own. Inside was a small, cramped space. But what caught her attention wasn't the confessional chair. It was the walls. Carved into the wood, layer after layer, were words. Latin prayers mixed with symbols of blasphemy. Some looked like claw marks, as if something had written them in agony. In the center, burned deep into the wall, was a single word. Confiteor. "I confess." Father Gabriel's face turned ashen. "This wasn't written by human hands," he said, crossing himself. Suddenly, the recorder stopped buzzing. Instead, it played a clear voice, a woman's whisper. It said, "Forgive me, Father, for I am not alone." Evelyn froze. That voice? Before she could finish, the confessional door slammed shut with a thunderous crack. The sound echoed like a gunshot through the empty halls. Evelyn rushed to open it, but it was locked tight. "Gabriel, help me!" she cried. Together, they pulled at the door until it burst open and revealed something impossible. The confessional was empty, but the symbols on the wall were glowing faintly red, like embers from a dying fire. Smoke rose from them, filling the air with a stench of burnt flesh. Gabriel stumbled backward, clutching his crucifix. From the shadows, the whisper came again. Not from the recorder this time, but from the walls themselves. "Confess," it hissed. "All must confess." Evelyn's breath came in short, panicked bursts. "Gabriel, it's responding. It wants us to speak." He shook his head violently. "No, that's how it began. The nuns, they thought it was the voice of God, asking them to confess their sins. But once they obeyed, once they spoke, it took them." "Then what happened to them?" Evelyn asked, her voice trembling. "They disappeared. Each one who entered here after dark. Their confessions became offerings." Evelyn looked around, her flashlight trembling over the carvings. She noticed small holes in the back wall, leading into darkness, almost like vents. "There's something behind this wall," she murmured. Ignoring Gabriel's protests, she stepped closer and pressed her ear to the wood. The faint sound of breathing came from the other side. Slow, wet, alive. Then, as she listened, a whisper brushed her ear from inside the confessional. Her own voice, repeating her earlier words. "We're here to uncover the truth." Evelyn screamed and stumbled back. The air grew thick with whispers, dozens of voices rising into a chorus of madness. Father Gabriel grabbed her hand. "We have to go now." They ran from the chamber, slamming the door behind them. The voices continued, muffled through the wood, still chanting Confiteor, Confiteor. When they reached the hallway, Evelyn bent over, gasping for breath. Her recorder was still running. She pressed play, hoping to capture proof of what had happened. But the playback was not what she expected. Instead of the whispers, the recorder played a single voice. Calm, male. "Forgive me, Sister Evelyn, for I have sinned." Her heart stopped. She looked at Gabriel in horror. "It knew my name." He didn't respond. He was staring at the confessional door down the hall, which now stood wide open again, though no one had touched it. And from within, a faint silhouette appeared. A nun, head bowed, hands clasped in prayer. But her face was shadowed, and her habit was soaked in something dark and red. The whisper returned, louder this time. a chilling command that echoed through the halls. "Come, confess." Evelyn's flashlight flickered, and before the beam went out completely, she saw what looked like dozens of pale hands reaching through the open confessional, grasping for her. The convent was alive, and it wanted more confessions. After the terrifying encounter in the confession chamber, Evelyn and Father Gabriel moved through the convent like fugitives, guided only by the trembling beam of their flashlight. Dust drifted through the air like falling ash, and the ancient corridors seemed to shift around them. Stretching, narrowing, alive. They reached the lower cloister where a staircase led deep underground. A rusted sign above the arch read, "Archivum Inferni," the Infernal Archive, the very place where, according to legend, St. Mary's had stored forbidden records, documents the church had ordered destroyed. Evelyn hesitated at the top step. If the nuns were confessing something that wasn't theirs, it must have come from here. Gabriel nodded grimly. There are stories of a secret pact. Centuries ago, the Mother Superior promised to keep certain knowledge hidden, things that were never meant to be read. The descent was suffocating. The deeper they went, the heavier the air grew, damp with the smell of rot and ancient decay. When they reached the bottom, they found a corridor lined with iron doors, each marked with the name of a nun and a year. Some went back to the 1600s. One door stood open. The name engraved on it read Sister Agnes, 1897. Inside, rows of manuscripts lay scattered across the floor. Evelyn knelt and picked one up carefully. The ink was blackened, but the Latin text was still legible. Her lips trembled as she read aloud. "The flesh of the faithful must be offered. Their confessions feed the voice that guards the gate." She froze. The voice? The one from the confessional. Gabriel took another scroll and unrolled it. Inside was a drawing, a circular sigil surrounded by crying faces, identical to the symbols carved into the walls upstairs. "This isn't holy scripture," he whispered. "It's an invocation." Suddenly, the air shifted. A low rumbling echoed through the stone corridor. The candles flickered, and somewhere down the hall, a door slammed shut. Evelyn clutched her recorder. "Someone's here," she breathed. But when they turned toward the sound, they didn't see a person. Instead, dozens of nun-shaped shadows moved along the walls, flickering silhouettes that didn't belong to any living being. Their whispers rose again, chanting the same line in perfect unison. "Confess and be cleansed." The temperature dropped. Gabriel's breath came out as mist. He grabbed Evelyn's arm. "We have to leave." But before they could move, the manuscripts in her hand burst into flame, burning with no heat, only darkness. From the ashes, a faint voice hissed, "You read what was sealed. Now you are bound." The archive's doors began to close one by one, metal clanging like the tolling of a funeral bell. Evelyn's recorder flickered once more, capturing her last terrified whisper as they ran toward the stairwell. "St. Mary's isn't haunted by ghosts. It's haunted by its own sins." Evelyn and Father Gabriel burst out of the underground archive and collapsed against the convent's cracked marble floor. Their lungs burned with the stench of smoke and centuries-old dust. Behind them, the stone staircase groaned, as if something massive was shifting below, something that had just awakened. The entire convent trembled. The crucifixes hanging along the corridor began to twist upside down one by one. The candles lining the walls snuffed out, plunging everything into a suffocating dark. From that blackness, the voices began again. Louder now, angrier, echoing through the walls like thunder. "You have seen what was hidden. You will join us in silence." Evelyn's recorder flickered in her shaking hands. "It's them," she said, trembling. "The nuns, they're still trapped here." "No," Gabriel murmured. "Not trapped. Condemned." A door slammed open at the far end of the hallway. Cold light spilled from within, a faint glow, pulsing like a heartbeat. Against his better judgment, Gabriel led Evelyn toward it. Inside was the convent's chapel, now desecrated. Statues of saints stood shattered, and the altar was coated in a dark, tar-like residue that reeked of blood. In the center of the altar lay a single chalice, overflowing not with wine, but something black and glistening, pulsed as if alive. Gabriel froze. This is it. This is where they performed it. Performed what? Evelyn asked, voice barely a whisper. The ritual that opened the veil. The Mother Superior's final mass. Before she could respond, a gust of freezing air swept across the chapel. Candles lit themselves in rows, one by one, until the entire room was aglow, revealing figures in every pew. Nuns, dozens of them sitting perfectly still. Their faces were pale, eyes sunken, lips sewn shut with black thread. Evelyn stumbled backward. They're still here. Then, as if on cue, all their heads turned at once. The sound of bone creaking echoed through the silence. They stared at Evelyn and Gabriel with eyeless sockets that seemed to weep black tears. From the altar, a tall figure began to rise, draped in the tattered robes of the Mother Superior. Her veil was soaked crimson, and when she spoke, her voice was layered, 1,000 whispers speaking as one. You broke the seal, she said, pointing at Evelyn. Now the sin must feed again. The ground cracked beneath their feet. The pews splintered. The nuns stood, mouths tearing open as if stitched flesh couldn't contain their screams. Evelyn and Gabriel ran, the chapel collapsing behind them, the whispers turning to shrieks that filled every corner of the convent. As they reached the main doors, they found them locked, sealed by invisible force. Outside, lightning flashed across the sky, and in that light, Evelyn saw the reflection on the chapel's shattered glass. Her own face, wearing the black veil of a nun. The convent wasn't letting her leave. The thunder outside grew wild, rattling the stained glass windows as Evelyn clawed at the convent's locked doors. It's sealed, she screamed. Gabriel, help me. But Father Gabriel stood frozen, eyes wide, staring at the burning crucifix above the altar. His lips trembled as he whispered prayers that no longer made sense. Deliver us, O Lord, deliver us. The voices of the dead nuns surrounded them, 100 whispers merging into a hymn of madness. Their hollow eyes glowed faintly in the dark, each step they took echoing like the toll of a funeral bell. Evelyn spun around, holding her recorder like a weapon. You're not holy spirits, she shouted. You were trapped, manipulated, by something darker. The air quivered. The towering figure of the Mother Superior appeared once more, her robes dragging across the blood-stained floor. It is not darkness, she said, her voice echoing from every wall. It is penance, and you have trespassed upon sacred ground. As she raised her skeletal hand, the room exploded with wind. The candles went out, plunging the world into total blackness. Evelyn felt something cold wrap around her wrist, thin, bony fingers pulling her backward. She struggled, screaming, until Gabriel lunged forward, clutching his crucifix. Release her, he shouted. The cross blazed with sudden light, searing the darkness like fire. The phantom nuns shrieked and recoiled, their forms flickering. For a moment, Evelyn was free. But then the light dimmed. Gabriel fell to his knees, blood seeping from his nose and ears. The Mother Superior smiled. Faith is no weapon here, she whispered. For this is where faith died. Evelyn dropped beside him. Gabriel, we can't fight them. We have to end it. Her eyes darted to the burning altar. The chalice, the black liquid within, still pulsed like a heart. She understood. The offering, she said softly. If we destroy it, maybe the curse will die too. Gathering her strength, she ran toward the altar. The nuns shrieked in fury, shadows clawing at her legs, dragging her down. She screamed, reaching out, her hand closing around the chalice. The moment her fingers touched it, every voice in the convent screamed at once. The air grew thick, suffocating, and the walls began to melt as though the building itself were bleeding. Evelyn lifted the chalice high and hurled it to the ground. It shattered into 1,000 shards. The black liquid ignited, flames spreading in a violent burst that swallowed everything. The altar, the pews, the nuns. Gabriel reached for her, his face pale. Run! But Evelyn didn't move. She looked toward the Mother Superior, who was standing motionless in the fire. The ghostly woman smiled, not in rage but in sorrow. "You have done what we could not," she whispered. "Now we can rest." As the fire consumed the convent, Evelyn felt the whispers fade, replaced by silence. The walls crumbled, the ceiling collapsed, and light poured through the ruin as dawn broke. Hours later, rescuers would find only ashes where St. Mary's once stood. Among the debris lay a single recorder, still intact. When played, it captured one final whisper. Evelyn's voice, faint but calm. "The nuns have found peace, but St. Mary's still breathes." And as the tape ended, a faint sound followed. A woman's quiet laugh,